Hello, Comics Alternative fans. Before we start with the episode, we want to invite all of you to check out our Patreon campaign.
That's right. Go to www.patreon.com/comicsalternative for more details. There you'll find more information about the campaign and the cool rewards levels we have.
For as little as $1 a month, you can help us maintain good quality comics talk, and the more you contribute, the more perks you get.
These include monthly podcast episodes exclusive to Patreon supporters, as well as the chance to help us choose which books we review on the show. So be sure to visit www.patreon.com/comicsalternative and become one of our proud podcast patrons.
Yeah, and now on with the show.
This is the Comics Alternative Webcomics, reviews of The Fox Sister, Derelict, and The Situation.
Brought to you by Kellogg's. K-E-double-L-O double good. Kellogg's best to you.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Webcomics. I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about webcomics.
And on this episode of the Webcomics Show, we're going to be looking at 3 webcomics, 2 currently ongoing and 1 completed. First, we're going to discuss Christina Strain and Jade Aït-Kaci's The Fox Sister. After that, Ben Fleuter's Derelict. And then we're going to wrap up with The Situation by Jeff VanderMeer and Eric Orchard. But before we get to those webcomics, we want to let all of our listeners know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Webcomics is brought to you by the wonderful folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, which is dcbservice.com, and you'll find that they'll take care of all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There you'll find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are at 20 to 35% off cover price, and every single month they have incredible specials. Sometimes those specials are at 45% off, sometimes they're at 50% off cover price, but many times those discounts are much more impressive than that.
And since we're talking about webcomics, we also want to point out that you can go to DCB Services website, and in the upper right-hand corner, you can click on the green arrow that says My Digital Comics. Mm-hmm. And they have a lot of digital comics that you can choose from. They have new releases, hottest titles, which right now includes a couple of Valiant titles, Archer and Armstrong, Bloodshot, at really good discounts. And they also have free products. They have page after page after page of free digital comics. You can't beat that.
That's right. You can't beat it with a stick or anything else that you want to beat something with. Yeah. But you know, whether it's webcomics or whether it is hard copies, you cannot go wrong with the good folks at Discount Comic Book Service and My Digital Comic. Go to the website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do go there and get your comics, digital or hard copy, be sure to drop them a line and let them know that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
That's right.
Well, Andy, here we are in the month of May. I think this is our 6th webcomic episode. We started in December, so that means we've been doing this series for half a year.
Wow, it really doesn't seem like it.
No, it doesn't. And I was thinking about this today because I was looking at the number of webcomics that we've been discussing, and this builds up over time. You know, we look at 3 a month, which may not sound like a lot, but in addition to everything else, you know, we have to read for the comics, alternative and otherwise, our own personal readings, then, you know, that does build up over time. And some of these webcomics are quite long. Classic example, last month's Digger.
Digger took quite a while, and actually I think we're going to the opposite end of the spectrum this month with our completed webcomic. I think, Derek, that may be the shortest completed webcomic that we've looked at.
Well, there was that Emily Carroll when we first started back in December. I think that was probably shorter. But
right.
But it's comparable to that. So I think all of the titles here are a little more containable, which is fine. And just because something is shorter doesn't mean that it's less substantive. There's definitely a lot of story in the situation, but we'll get to that toward the end of the program. You want to go ahead and begin our discussion of the currently ongoing titles?
Yeah, let's do that.
Now, the first one we're going to be looking at is The Fox Sister. This is written and colored by Christina Strain, and it's drawn by Jade Aït-Kaci, and I'm not sure how to pronounce that last name. It is I with an umlaut T-Kaci. So if you have a different way of pronouncing that, please let me know. Andy?
No, I think you've got it as well as I could do, and better than I could do.
Yeah, that was actually code for I'll let Derek make an idiot of himself trying to pronounce a name he can't handle, and I'll keep hands off.
Yeah, that's right.
This is a webcomic that began around the middle, or at least in the last half of 2011, and it is technically currently ongoing, although this has not been updated since January of this year, so it's been on a bit of a hiatus, and we can talk about that in a little while. But Andy, if you had to describe The Fox Sister to the uninitiated, how would you do so?
Well, let me tell you a little bit about the story before we get into either the writing style or the art style. The story begins in South Korea in 1961, and a girl named Yoon-hee wakes up in her home. She's freezing, and she knows that something is going on. And she's looking for her big sister, whose mat on the floor is empty. She hears a loud thud. She goes into her parents' bedroom and sees that a demonic-looking fox has destroyed the room and her parents. Yoon-hee thinks that her big sister has become the Kumiho, I think I'm pronouncing that right, which is the Korean nine-tailed fox. And that is a shape-shifting demoness that typically takes on the form of a woman before she murders and devours humans.
A beautiful woman.
A beautiful woman, yes, at exactly. That. The story jumps forward very quickly. It jumps to 1968, 7 years later, and Yoon-hee is looking for that nine-tailed fox, and she's looking for revenge for her parents who were slain by it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now this begins. You mentioned in 1961 in Kunsan, and then we jump ahead after the first several pages, about 7 years later, 1968, in Seoul. Mm-hmm. So every now and again, there is a flashback to that earlier time, 1961, in Busan. But the vast majority of the action takes place in 1968. And, you mentioned the main player there. The protagonist is Yoon-hee, and her sister, who is the Kumiho, or at least the Kumiho has assumed the figure, the appearance of the older sister, is Soon-hee. And another character that becomes quite prominent in this webcomic is Alex. Now, Alex is an American who comes to South Korea at first as a part of the military. Then in the military, I think he says it's his chaplain who gets him interested in missionary work around the time that he is about to leave the army. And he finds that being a missionary is much more to his liking than being in the military. So he sticks around in Seoul, South Korea, doing the missionary work. And actually, it's at or right near the Christian church that Yoon-hee meets Alex, and they meet each other through, I guess you could say, a minor character, but who's nonetheless important, and this is a dog, Suit Bull.
Yes, and Suit Bull does have a fairly prominent role to play in the webcomic, and he's a really cute dog, too, so if you're a fan of dogs, you're probably going to like Suit Bull. And again, as Derek mentioned, you have not only a conflict of cultures, but a conflict of religion. Alex is a Christian, and Yoon-hee is a Mugyo, which is a Korean shaman or shamaness. And she is basically a practicing priestess who uses magic to cure people, to tell fortunes, that type of thing. So they have multiple differences in their lives.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, we see Yoon-hee throughout this narrative, especially, I guess, in the first half, creating, and I guess you pronounce it pujak, which are these charms, they're papers that figures are written on, and they act as a form of talisman. Mm-hmm. And so we see that she is creating these at the beginning. She gives them away as gifts sometimes, but they're not just tchotchkes, right? I mean, there's something that actually have meaning to her. And in fact, this is one of the differences, or at least the perceived difference between Yoon-hee at one point and Alex, in that Yoon-hee thinks that Alex sees her religion being a part of the mudang as that he doesn't really take it seriously, but I don't think that's the case at all. He says at one point that no, he does, and he doesn't see the pujak, again, the talisman papers, as just something like a fortune cookie insert. So there is this misunderstanding between these two characters, and I think especially between Yoon-hee and Alex, because Yoon-hee, given her background, given what happened to her, the sister, the kumiho, she's a little suspicious, she's rather guarded, and when she meets Alex, she is standoffish and reserved, and so it's Alex as the one who has to work his charm in order to I guess, melt her resistance, which, at least at the part of the narrative where things have ended so far, he seems to have done. But she has certain preconceived notions of Americans, I think, and some of them may apply to Alex, but others are misreadings of Alex, and he gently clears up those misunderstandings at times. And I think it's through that relationship of each of them learning about the other that is one of the things that drives this webcomic.
I think you're right, and I think that one of the strengths of the webcomic is that it does not. It could easily have gone into stereotypes, and you could have had the Christian and the non-Christian battling, and the typical things that you see, and the American and the Korean, and I mentioned it was a clash of cultures, but it's not a typical clash of cultures that you might see. I think it's handled a lot more intelligently than we normally see these things, especially in films. And there is a bit of Alex kind of getting to know Yoon-hee through the dog, Suit Bull. And while that does have a certain amount of charm to it, it's not exactly a must-love dogs type of story. There are familiar elements to us that we feel like, okay, we've seen this before, we know where it's going, but it doesn't exactly do that. I think that the writing here is a lot better than what we might expect from something that looks to be like it might be stereotyped, and it's not.
Yeah, I think it resists falling into those kind of stereotypical assumptions, and I would guess that much of this has to do with the fact of the creator's subject position. Now, I don't know for a fact, but is Christina Strain Korean, or does she have a Korean parentage in any way?
I'm not sure, and I did not pick up anything that made that clear. Just kind of perusing her website, and she does have a couple of things. We really haven't talked much about the layout of the webcomic. She does have on the front page, you can go to, of course, you can go to pages, you can go to the store, she sells some things there, and then she has a news link. And in the news link, she talks about some of the things that have to do with the comic, how she got started. And Derek, we mentioned earlier that we would get into a little bit about Christina. And we learned from the news page that Christina is working on an MFA in screenwriting. And at one time, she was writing a script called Fox Sister for a class. And later on, apparently, she began working on a feature film which has caused the Fox Sister webcomic to go on something of a hiatus.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not exactly sure when this is going to pick up, or really at what point she is going to be able to jump back into it. Like I said, there are items in the news page that she has, and I did not read all of those, but listeners might be able to find out a little bit more information there.
Exactly. Now, we've talked about this website, and you were describing it. It occurs to me now that we haven't given the website, and this is a webcomic show. So,
yeah, we might want to do that.
Yeah, the web address is thefoxsister.com, TheFoxsister.com. Although I have put in the browser foxsister.com, and it quickly comes up. So there's that. Now, you mentioned, Andy, let's talk about the website itself. And one of the things we mention, we don't really focus exclusively on, and sometimes we don't spend much time on, but this being a webcomic show, we do talk about layout, navigability, and ease of use and all that. You said that, there is a news page, which, we get information and updates, as you just read from. And then there is a link for pages, which is basically the archive, right? So if you want to skip around from one part of the story to another, and right now they're into the 4th chapter. So we have 3 completed chapters and a 4th that has temporarily ended, at least back in January. But then there's some other links, or what looks like they could be links as well. One is you mentioned the store. The store link doesn't work.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah. And
I'd never clicked on it.
And I do believe that there has been a hard copy, has there not, of Fox Sister at some point? I think I saw that, didn't I, somewhere?
Yes. Fox Sister has been published as 3 hardcover, or not hardcover, but hard copy volumes, 1 per chapter. And the 4th one, which obviously is not finished, has not been collected. But I don't know if those were... if she gave that news out to followers. I'm not sure if it's something you can readily purchase.
Yeah, and I can understand when a website is still under construction, but the thing is, of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 links that are in, I guess, what could be called a menu ribbon, only news and pages are actually working. Store doesn't work. Extra, there's nothing there, and that's even faint. It's almost as if someone's trying to erase it. And then links as well. There's none there. So I'm okay with that. It does nothing to the story itself, but I just wonder, why are those up there? And what is it now? About 4 years into the story, and I assume 4 years into this website. So those pages aren't up yet. Another thing about the navigability, it's fairly easy to move from one page to the other. You can either click on an arrow at the top of the comics page proper to take you either forward or back a page, or you could just click on the current page, whichever one you were on, and it takes you to the next. And as I've said before on these webcomic shows, I really appreciate that. So you can click on the page. You don't have to necessarily go to an arrow to move forward. Or if you're reading on a tablet, you can just tap the page with your finger. It takes you to the next. So that makes ease of use really nice. We also we've focused in the past on reader participation and comments, and the Fox Sister does allow readers to comment on what's going on. I didn't find these comments burdensome, annoying, or that they distracted any way from the enjoyment of the story. Now, granted, since we've been doing these webcomic shows, I've been paying less and less attention to the reader comments underneath because, for the most part, I really don't find them useful. But these don't seem overwhelming and problematic to me.
Yeah, I felt the same way, and like you, Derek, I'm probably reading comments less and less as we go through our journey of webcomics than I was before. There are a couple of instances, though, where Christina Strain has put comments not in the, and this is kind of odd, I don't know that we've seen this before, they're not in the comments section, but they're actually at the bottom of the webcomic.
I'm glad that you mentioned that.
That really, I mean, she doesn't do it that often, but that really does take me out of the story. It's very obtrusive. On one page, you actually have the actual webcomic, and at the very bottom of the webcomic, it says, "Sorry for the delay. I was having lettering issues on my end. I am," in all caps, "bad at this." Mm-hmm. That really takes you out of the story, and I understand if she feels the need to put comments in. I just didn't understand why she didn't put them in the comments section.
Exactly. Yeah, I wondered the same thing. And the comment that you just raised, I think, is a good example of a justified authorial comment to make in the comments section of a webcomic. I have no problem with that. And you know, we've talked about this before on the show, that where creator input in the comments section becomes troublesome is when when it approaches spoiler territory. They say, "Ooh, guess what? Something exciting, and it involves this character. Come back next week and you'll see." And it's like, do I really need to know this? You know, if I enjoyed this comic, I was going to come back, you know, the next installment anyhow. But I think even more bothersome than that example that you gave is with comments from Strain that are absolutely unnecessary because they provide nothing about a context or why it was late or anything of the sort. This is in the first chapter, and this is fairly early on in the story. This is when we see Yun-hee performing her, I guess, the mudang dance with the knives. Mm-hmm. And she's putting her knives up, and underneath the comic, and on the comic, not in the comments section, is Yun-hee, what a big knife you have! ! And I thought, okay, now that really wasn't necessary. It is a humorous aside, and it would be okay if that humorous comment was in the comments section. But the fact, as you point out, that it is right underneath the comic page proper. In other words, it is on the comic page, the way things are presented. It does take you out of the story. Now, if I wanted to get out of the story, I would just scroll down to the comments section and see the various things that people have said, like, is that really a Tento or something? This is so beautiful and clean, like a perfect revenge. And, you know, some of these comments are insightful. I think most of them are just, you know, ephemeral, right? There's nothing wrong with them, but I really wouldn't read them. This Yun-hee, what a big knife you have, is something that is ephemeral. Yeah, it's a joke, but does the author need to make a joke on her own page in a story that I've just started to become involved in?
Mm-hmm. And the thing about it, too, it's inescapable. If you wanted to avoid comments, you can certainly do that and just say, I'm just not going to read below the edge of the page. But here, you can't avoid it.
Yeah. Okay. You know, actually, looking closer at this page, I guess it's not on the page, but it's in the box where the page is. Definitely not in the comments section. But, you know, but you're right in that you can't avoid it because it's right there. You're looking at the bottom row of this 3-row page, and it's right there underneath. So,
well, thankfully, it doesn't happen that often.
It doesn't. And I know that we've taken about a minute or two to point out some of the weaknesses of this comic, but in no way whatsoever do I want to suggest that this is a weak story at all. And in fact, I really enjoy this. Of the 3 that we're reading today, I think this is one of the strongest. I was able to really get into the story. I think that Strain did an outstanding job of creating character and letting the character, especially Yun-hee and her relationship with Alex, unfold slowly over time. I don't think anything's rushed. And for me, there were some mysteries and gaps that were in this story, but that's to be expected. I think that Strain filled in those gaps as she moved along. In other words, she allowed us as readers to slowly get our narrative sea legs, so to speak. And so I think that's what a successful narrative does. It doesn't throw out all the answers at one time, like in a big clunky, awkward exposition. But as the story progresses, as it unfolds, any questions that you have when you start this story are going to be answered as you go along. And I think that Strain does a great job of that.
I think so too, and if this is any indication of her skills as a filmmaker, I think her films are probably going to be very good. She has a very good visual sense of pacing, and by that, I'll just give you an example. It's in Chapter 1, where it's actually on page 15, and it's a scene after Yun-hee has sold some charms to what appear to be two American girls, and we get a series of panels that reveal to us a lot about how Yun-hee has changed in the past 7 years since we saw her in the prologue. And the way those panels are constructed, they're set up in a way as to reveal those changes without any text. And it's really, really well done. And I like the sense of balance that she uses with the panels. And I don't know really enough about Korean culture to know if this has any bearing, but the way that the panels are done, it's like the first row is a square followed by a rectangle, then the reverse, rectangle followed by a square. There's just this sense of balance and symmetry to that whole page that, to me, it feels like it's very significant. And the visual storytelling there is very effective.
And in fact, that's the same page that I was alluding to earlier with the Yun-hee, what a big knife you have comment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's there too.
Yeah. But you're right. This is a beautiful page, and it is wordless. In fact, it's wordless without being, but it's not soundless, because you do get a click sound as Yun-hee is closing a door after, I guess, the two women leave. And you say they're two American women. I didn't see that, but I guess they could.
I just assumed they were American, the way they were drawn and the way they behaved on the page. They seemed like they were kind of almost doing a touristy thing in buying those charms. I may be wrong about that part.
See, I thought of them as Korean women, and we don't have them speaking in English, so you don't have the carrots at the end of their speech within the word balloons, which we do get later on when Alex speaks, and when Yun-hee speaks with Alex in English. Then you get the carrots, and that's a common form that's used in comics like this. But whoever these women are, when they leave, you do get this silent series of 6 panels, and you're right in pointing out the symmetry of the 3 rows. But also the various images do tell us something about her character and how she has matured, since 1961 when, this tragedy happened and she lost her family. We see her preparing her knives very carefully. And then there's one scene, this is the panel in the bottom left, where we see the reflection of her eye in the blade of the knife. And this tells us a lot about who Yun-hee is right now and what she's capable of. And we don't see this until later on in the story, what she's actually capable of.
Yeah, that's a very nice touch. There's another scene that I like very much. I think it's in Chapter 2, and I'm not going to reveal who this is, but we see a woman sitting near the window in her home or in her apartment. She's naked, although it's tastefully concealed, mostly in shadow, so we're not really sure. Again, I'm not going to tell you who it is. But the entire page is mostly in black and white and gray, except for a red dress that's hanging on a chair. And behind that chair, we see the shadow of the nine-tailed fox. And we don't know really at this point what is happening, but in a way, this is a literal foreshadowing, a symbolism of something. And again, I don't want to give too much away here, but that scene is brilliantly executed. And also, it's another example. We haven't really talked much about this, but the way that Christina Strain and the artist Jate, I'm just going to call Jate, uses color. It's a very, very effective use of color throughout the whole webcomic.
Yeah, Aït-Kaci or Kaci. I don't know how you pronounce. Again, I'm attempting and probably failing to pronounce Jade's name.
I'm letting you make the attempt.
Yeah, speaking of the art, this is definitely influenced by Japanese style or manga style illustration. Getting back to what Shay and I were talking about last week in our first manga episode, that manga both is and isn't a style. Manga is comics, Japanese for comics. At the same time, though, there are certain characteristics of a lot, not every kind of manga art. And I think that some of those characteristics come out in Aït-Kaci's or Kaki's art in Fox Sister. But this is, it may be influenced by manga, but this is, I wouldn't call this manga. It'd be okay if you did. Why not? But but that's the kind of style I think that we have here.
And I'm glad you brought that up about the manga episode that you and Shay did. And if listeners haven't listened to the episode that you and Shay did about manga, it's a really, really good episode. And I applaud you guys for doing that. And I think
thanks.
That was a really nice first episode. But I think you're right, Derek. This has some... at first I would say there were trace elements of manga in this, but maybe they're a little bit stronger than trace elements. But there are also elements from other types of webcomics and comics as well. Listeners should definitely not expect it to be, exactly a manga style, but I think that those trace elements are definitely there.
And I think that's a good way of putting it, trace elements. I hadn't thought of that, but hearing you describe it that way just makes a little more sense to me.
Well, I think this is a really, like you said, this is a really strong webcomic. It's a shame that it's not updated more. And but again, if Christina Strain is working on a feature film, she's probably doesn't have a lot of time to devote to the Fox Sister. But what would be nice is if she had maybe an assistant or a friend or somebody that could update some of those links on the web page. That would be nice, and update us as to news.
Yeah. So definitely a title worth checking out, even though it hasn't been updated in several months. This is The Fox Sister, and you can find it at thefoxsister.com.
Yep, definitely worth checking out.
So you want to move on to Derelict now.
Let's do.
Okay, this is by Ben Fleuter, and if you go to derelictcomic.com, you will find the webpage. So it's very easy to get to. Again, derelictcomic.com. So this is another title that's been going on since 2011, and I was trying to find out the date of the very first entry, which is, I guess, the title page of Chapter 1, or Book 1, which is called Deluge, or Deluge. And so there's no date on it, though, and how did I find out that it was 2011? I think that there were some comments in this site that I found out that this did begin in 2011, and it says it's updated every Monday, but if this has been going on for the past 4 years, updated every Monday with as many pages as we have, and if you look at the archive, in the first book, Deluge, there are 154 pages, and the second book is Cloister. There's so far 78. This is not being updated every Monday, but we do get a really good chunk of story, so it's been going on since sometime in 2011.
And we should point out, too, that like the last comic that we looked at, The Fox Sister, the first book of Derelict has been published in print form. Mm-hmm. I think it probably ends at the end of Book 1. I didn't check that to make sure. But it was, or at least it was available at one time in print.
And in fact, Fleuter's store page, the store link actually does work. And so if you go to the website and click on his store, you'll see that, and I guess it's still available. Derelict Book 1 you can get for $20. You can get a PDF version of it for $4.50. But then there are other things that are for sale up there as well. So if you want to get posters or other kind of art, you can go to the store page on the website. So that's good. But, we're focused on webcomics, so we want to talk about the webcomic version of Derelict.
That's right.
Yeah. So, now earlier I asked you to describe what's going on in Fox Sister or what it's about. Now, I'm going to ask you the same thing in Derelict. One, because I think this is a challenge, and I want to see if you can rise to the challenge. But more importantly, I couldn't do it. You asked me what's going on, and I would be completely clueless, which I want to talk about. But okay. I think you may have a better grasp on what's going on than I do.
Well, and I'll tell listeners a little bit about that in just a few minutes. I think I can explain the setup fairly well, and we'll get listeners involved in how the world that we're set in. Beyond that, not so sure. What we have here at the beginning is a really unusual beginning. It starts very innocently with a pinwheel, one of those things that a child plays with, a multicolored pinwheel, and an inquisitive seagull. And soon we see that we're on a boat. And this is a boat with a single passenger. It's a young woman whose name is Dang Tu Mai. And Dang is a scavenger, and the name of her ship is the Penumbra. Mm-hmm. And she is sailing in what appears to be a post-apocalyptic or post-flood world. Something called the fog was responsible for this devastation. And she is basically just sailing, trying to scavenge food, clothing, fuel for her boat. That's basically how the story starts. It goes in some really unusual directions. It also requires the reader to make several jumps with Fleuter as he tells his story.
Several?
Several? Multiple?
Just several?
But it's a very, I thought it was a very engaging story. Now, again, this is split into Book 1 and Book 2. Book 2 right now is only about half the length of Book 1. And I think these are two very different books. So maybe, Derek, we just want to talk about Book 1 for a few minutes?
Or
both.
Well, we can talk about the whole thing.
Okay.
Because I do think that, I agree that there's a difference between the two books, Deluge and Cloister. I was able to wrap my brain around the first book more than I was the second, even though I still had a lot of questions. There are, I think the players, the context in Book 1 were a little more limited and containable. Mm-hmm. I still had a lot of questions, but it wasn't a fully developed story world. It's like we were just getting introduced to things. And in fact, speaking of the story world, you mentioned a post-apocalyptic world after a flood. Now, I could tell almost immediately this was, after the first several pages, some kind of post-apocalyptic or some tragic or traumatic world that we're living in here. I didn't know that it was a world after a flood, and I guess I could have gotten that from the title of Book 1, Deluge. But it really hit home when I clicked on the website's extras page, and there is a link to a cinematic teaser, which is a trailer made for Derelict before it launched, it's described. And it does give a short video, I think it's about 2 minutes long, of the setup of this world, or at least the setup in terms of the physical setting, that this is a world that has been flooded. And that's about all that the cinematic teaser tells you. It doesn't tell you much about anything else that's going on here. So it's like, what is this thing with miasmics? What about, the fog? It may touch upon that, but it doesn't really tell you much more than there's been a big flood, guys, and this is the setup of the story. So, but in that first book, it does follow Dang Thu Mai, the protagonist, fairly closely. and she's trying to get by. She's trying to scavenger for supplies in order to live. And she, has various encounters with different figures and other characters. So that was fairly easy for me to wrap my brain around, even though I still had some questions about the context, the setting, who some of the characters were. But then by the time we get to Book 2, Cloister, there are many more players involved, to where Dang at times is not even in the story, it seems. In fact, at one point I was wondering, where the hell is Dang? Dang, where's Dang? I can't believe I said that. But she wasn't a part of the story. Now, she does come in, at least in that second half of what may be a half of Book 2 now that we have. But other than that, there were just a lot of other characters who were in play, and I didn't understand exactly who they were, what their relationships were, what this situation was, because there seemed to be, for me, and maybe you can tell me what you thought, an abrupt shift, at least in the way that I was reading this post-traumatic or post-apocalyptic world, this post-flood world, that I thought that Dang's relationship to these other creatures, how would you call them? Dragon-like, lizard-like, monster-like?
Actually, I looked in, and I'll talk about this a little bit later too. There's a forum that you can go to, and Fleuter calls these gargoyles. They're kind of monsters with kind of skull heads.
That's what Dang calls, but I didn't know that that's what.
Is that what she calls them too? I couldn't remember. I couldn't remember if he mentioned it first, or if I saw it on the forum first, or if I remembered it from the comic. But yeah, they're referred to as gargoyles.
Okay, so at first I thought that there was just no kind of rapprochement between Dang and the gargoyles, but then when we get to Book 2, Cloister, there's quite a bit of interaction. So apparently they're not all bad.
Yeah, and Derek, there's a lot of confusion going on here, and one of the things that's really confusing is, you see these scenes, and Dang is on her boat, and then she sees land, and then maybe in the next panel she's not only landed the boat or gotten off the boat, she's in a building, and we just assume that it's on the land that she saw. We don't know how she knew to go to this building. I mean, again, she's scavenging, so she's probably just doing it at random. But there's so many things that happen, and we almost feel like we've missed several panels, if not pages, in a lot of the comic. One of the things that I wanted to point out is one of the situations where she's on her boat and she gets hit by a much larger boat, actually a ship, and then suddenly she's on land, but the ship is full of these gargoyles, and they're definitely not friendly. They're after her. And again, there are more things that are unexplained. She seems to have some weapons that we understand, like Dang has a crossbow that she's pretty good with, but she also has these strange purple ultraviolet bolts that I'm not sure how those work or what they're based on. They're just some things that just happen, and we just have to take it on faith that Fleuter is either going to tell us what these mean, or that they're going to make some sense somewhere down the line.
Yeah, exactly. Now I was mentioning earlier that I was a little more confused, or actually quite a bit more confused in Book 2 than I was in Book 1. But with you mentioning these jumps in, I guess, narrative coherence, or at least in our understanding of what happens from one scene to another, and what may or may not lead from one scene to another. She's here, then she's there. Is there a connection? We don't know. We're not certain. There was one part of Book 1 that really had me confused, and I'm curious on your take of this. Now, this, I even marked it, this occurs between pages 64 and 94 of Book 1. Okay. And this, I think it basically takes place on what seems like a ship called Juneau, as in Juneau, Alaska. Mm-hmm. And there are at least one, maybe two time shifts or flashbacks, if we want to, I guess, maybe, I'm not sure, that involves, the setup on page 64 is the captain of the Juno, I'm assuming, is standing over one of his crewmen who's looking at something on the screen. And I think this is basically what, from what I can gather, sets off this flashback, or at least some kind of shift in perspective. And I'm assuming that it's a temporal shift, like a flashback. And then we find Dang, who is somewhere with the gargoyles trying to get something, but then when she is where she is doing what she's doing, we see at least two different settings and contexts. And the way that Fleuter distinguishes these is that the color tone slightly shifts. I think one is a little more green and the other is a little more brown. And we see her in panels in a similar composition, but with some slight variation. So in one, she may be wearing a helmet in one position. In another panel, she's in that same position within the same place within the panel's context, but without the helmet. And so there's some kind of flashback or time shift or something going on, and I'm not even sure. Now, when we get to page 94, we're back with the captain, who is, I'm assuming this is the ship captain, looking at the screen, and then we get a shot of the Juno again. So I'm just assuming that whatever's going on between 64 and 94 takes place on the Juno because of the visual narrative cues, and that it has something to do with the captain looking at the screen, which has something to do with Dang, and then Dang seems to be in two different places and two different times. Is it a flashback or not? What's going on? I'm not sure. Now that's my confusion. I've gone on quite a bit about my confusion. Please clear it up for me.
Well, I wish I could, and I'm going to even add more to the confusion because there's a scene before those scenes that you mentioned where Dang meets a human named Stephen Klein.
That's
and right. we don't really learn his name when we meet him, but he also has a gargoyle with him, and it looks to us that they have somewhat of a friendship-based relationship, which kind of strikes us as odd. So we're not really sure what happened, why some of these gargoyles are friendly and some of them are not. But we don't know who Stephen Klein is, but later on, as you mentioned, when she's on the Juno, there's evidence of Stephen Klein either having been a part of the Juno or had some connection to it. And again, it's not clear whether that's a flashback or whether that's in real time, but you're right about it does jump again to the captain on the Juno, so it's very confusing as to what's going on, as like you said, as far as the time element.
Yeah, so I'm not even sure she was on the Juno. It's never clear. Now, she's at Penumbra. I'm sorry, not Penumbra. Primrose. Primrose is the location.
Primrose,
and this looks to be a docking station of some sort. And that's where the Juno is. Now, is she on the Juno or is she somewhere else in Primrose? I don't know. And they mention Primrose several other times in this comic. So, and whatever happened in Primrose, whatever it was and whatever we're seeing between pages 64 and 94 of that first book is apparently significant because people are referring to it later, even into book 2.
Yeah.
But having read it 2 or 3 times, I still can't tell you exactly what's going on there in those pages.
I'm not sure either. And, I'm going to go ahead now and mention this, and I don't know if listeners will want to look at it. I did not look at it until, I looked to see what it was, but I tried not to read any of it until after I'd read the entire thing. And that is the forum. And you can go, there's a link to the forum from any page, and you can go to it, and Fleuter doesn't really answer questions, but several people have written in and they've said, what's the significance of this, or what's the significance of that, what does this mean, or I think this means this. And he doesn't really give you any fast and hard answers, but he does give you a couple of comments that might clear up some of the confusion for you. So after you've read the comic, the webcomic, and you go to the forum, I think it might maybe clear up some things, but he's not going to answer all of the big questions for you.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. Now, I know when you and I were going back and forth via email today, as we were, putting on the finishing touches of preparation for this show, I'd asked you about this forum, and you pointed it out. Where did you go on the forum to get that? Is it the discussion unanswered questions?
I think that's where it was. I'm clicking on it now. There are a lot of things on the forum that and you can go to latest page thread, book 2, latest page thread, book 1. I'm pretty sure it was unanswered questions. I'm clicking on that now. And yes, and there are some things that I'm not going to discuss, but someone has posted a series of 12 questions. Mm-hmm. And even that person's questions do open up some clarity into what's going on, but everything's not going to be explained. But again, I would not read those until I've read the entire webcomic. If nothing else, it gives you something to think about.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, after I'd read it for the first time and you pointed out the forum, I went there and I saw all the threads and I thought, oh my God, this is going to be confusing in a different way. So I didn't even attempt to read through those. But it's kind of like when we were talking a moment ago about the Fox Sisters, or the Fox Sister, and we mentioned something about those authorial comments that were, disruptive. And I said, don't think that this is a reason to dislike the comic, because that's just a minor bump. The rest of it's great. I mean, I do like Derelict, so even though I'm confused, I'm intrigued. And I didn't feel, well, okay, there was a while into the second book that I was getting a little tired of not knowing what the hell was going on. Mm-hmm. And I think I told you this in an email, what I did was I just resigned myself to the fact that at least this first time around, I'm not going to really understand everything, or maybe even much, depending, of what's going on. So I will just continue reading in hopes that, if not all, then at least some of the questions that I have will be answered. Mm-hmm. Now, getting to that last published page of Book 2, which is 78, I'm not sure that any of those questions got answered, but I'm nonetheless intrigued by Derelict, and would like to continue reading, because I would hope that by the time we get even further into the story, maybe past Book 2, that more of these questions that I have will be answered.
Well, I tell you, Derek, I am hooked on it. I actually am thinking about ordering the first volume in book form, because this is something I want to go back and spend some time with. There are, and reading a little bit of the forum, you see a few things that are sprinkled in there that might be clues, that might be a little helpful to understanding what's going on. This is something I want to spend some time with, and it probably will require a little bit of time. But it's one of those things that's, again, there's things that you read once and you're confused about, and you think, I don't want to go back and spend any more time in this world. And there are books that you do want to spend more time in. And for me, this is one of those books that I do want to spend some more time in.
Yeah, I agree. I even though I do have a problem with some of the questions that are still there, even into this probably halfway into Book 2, there's enough there that entices me to want to return to this and try to, delve deeper into it, and feel that maybe the more I look at this, the more sense it will make. Mm-hmm. So, because not every narrative has to be digested upon first or second reading, Mm-hmm. Literature is riddled with examples of narratives that are very difficult to ferret out the first 1, 2, 3, 4, or even 10 times that you read it. Mm-hmm. Think of Gravity's Rainbow. Think of The Sound and the Fury, especially, mm-hmm. Or Ulysses, right? So, you keep returning to those. Now, I don't want to suggest that this is the comics equivalent of The Sound and the Fury or Ulysses, but it does warrant multiple readings in order to really take in and get the full effect. And speaking of the full effect, we haven't talked about the art yet. No, we haven't.
Do you want to go ahead and address that? I have some other things that I'd like to address too. No, I just think that the use of color is very effective.
in the way that Fleuter represents these gargoyles. I mean, they do look frightening, imposing, even though, as we get into book 2, these are characters who are very human-like, even though they do look like monsters. And so there is this kind of shift and, I don't know, an almost uncomfortable sense of reading here, because we look at a character, it looks monstrous, but yet they act in a certain way that is not monstrous.
Yeah,
and I like that.
I do too, and I'm glad you mentioned that about the second book, because the second book does take on a very different tone to it. We have new characters in the second book, and we do see the gargoyles speaking a lot more. We learn a good bit just from the way that they're communicating to each other or to other humans. So yeah, it's a different. It's like he's opening up the world a little bit more than he did before. One of the things, though, that I like and I wanted to point out is Dang as a protagonist. And I really like this because she's somewhat against type, even for a hero. She's not pretty. She's really pretty ordinary looking. And she seems to maybe have some type of military training just from the clothes that she wears. It looks like maybe she has some kind of military background. But that doesn't really come out until she's faced with a dangerous situation. And I think that readers can relate to her ordinariness in a way that we typically don't see in a lot of comics. We usually see a really good-looking protagonist, whether it's male or female. She's just very ordinary looking, but there's something about her, and again, we learn a little bit more about her character. I don't think her character is revealed as in the same way that the character revealed in the Fox Sisters is revealed, but it's definitely revealed in a certain way.
Exactly. And also, in addition to Dang in Book 2, we're also introduced to other characters who become prominent. Now, you mentioned earlier the short appearance of Steve Klein, and he doesn't last for that long in Book 1, but at least where we are in Book 2, we're introduced to other characters who seem to me are significant or will become even more significant. So, for instance, there's another human by the name of Clint, or Clinton, who is associated or in cahoots with Impala, or Imp for short, who is a gargoyle. And then there's Impala's father, and I can't remember the father's name, but we get to see a little more of him. And then there's this hybrid creature, this is the way that they describe her, and I'm saying her because it seems female, and that's Una, who is toward the end of at least where we are in Book 2 now, seems to take more of a prominent role. And Una is a character, this kind of hybrid type creature that we see an example of in Book 1. And actually, that part of Book 1 is probably the creepiest. The creepiest part of that comic.
Yeah.
So, but again, coming back to Book 2, we do get more characters in play. So there are more moving narrative parts in Book 2 than Book 1. And I think that it seems as if Fleuter is upping his game with his second part. I think so
too. Yeah, and one of the things too that I wanted to point out is a lot of the panels are very non-traditional or asymmetrical. Some of them are just really crazy, just jagged, panels that don't seem to make sense, and most of those occur during action or explosion sequences or battle sequences or things like that.
Right, and rightly so. And the breakdown in those senses tells us something about the content, which is great.
But the thing about the comic that leaves you with lots of questions. There are questions about. We see this recurring theme of pinwheels a lot, and you think, okay, what do the pinwheels mean? And there's a theme of dyed hair, colored hair. What does that mean? What does what exactly happened with this fog? There's so many things that you want to know. And I trust, even this early in the story, and I don't know how long it's going to go, but I trust Fleuter to tell me or to lead me to a place that has some of these answers, or allows me to figure these answers out. One of the things, and I know this is not really a fair comparison, but I was trying to think of what other comic that this reminds me of, and the first thing that comes to mind is The Massive.
Oh, you're thinking about because it takes place largely on the water?
I think that's part of it, but one of the great things about The Massive is we information is revealed at a very slow pace a lot of times in that book, which I think is a very good comic. Mm-hmm. But and it's definitely, The Massive is definitely more of a traditionally told story, if you will, than Derelict. But there is that element of mystery that runs through The Massive that we're wondering, okay, how did we get here? What, who are the players? What's going on? It's just that with Derelict, there's just so many questions.
Oh yeah, I didn't have near the number of questions reading The Massive.
Oh no, yeah, and I don't mean to imply that those are the same in that way, but it just kind of reminded me a bit of The Massive.
Mm-hmm. Let's say a little bit about the website. I think the website is fairly simple, straightforward, not too cluttered. I mean, yeah, there are a couple of ads, but I don't think they're intrusive at all. And I definitely do not begrudge anyone, creator or otherwise, to put ads on their page. I mean, people have to make a few cents here or there somehow. Mm-hmm. So I think that the page is fairly simple. You have the ribbon menu going across. We've mentioned the archive, the extras. There's a gallery which includes art that fans have sent in. Apparently this is one of those comics, like a lot of webcomics, that has a dedicated fan base. There's also a store, the aforementioned store link. There's a forum that also aforementioned. But there's a donation page, but there's also a Patreon page. And if we look at Fleuter's Patreon account, he has 108 patrons, and so I'm a little envious. So for those who are listening to this episode of the Webcomics Show, if you're a fan of Derelict and you are a patron of Fleuter's Derelict Patreon page, then, become a patron of the Comics Alternative, right? Show us some love.
That's right.
Yeah, but I think it's fairly easy to navigate, although one thing I will say, unlike a lot of other webcomics, if you click anywhere on the comic page that's up, it doesn't take you anywhere. You either have to scroll up or down to click a little arrow. But that's not the biggest deal, really.
Derek, I don't exactly remember where this was, but I don't know if it happened to you. I was just clicking along, reading next, and I got to one page. It was somewhere in book 2 where the right-hand next button was grayed out, and it would not let me go any further. But when I went to the archive page, I could click on the page that was supposed to come up next, and I was okay. I don't know if you ran into that or if it was just a glitch.
I don't know. I don't remember that, and if that did happen to me, I just put it out of my mind. I don't recall anything like that.
Yeah, so listeners, if you run across that problem, maybe it was just a glitch, but you can go to the archive, which you can find, as Derek mentioned, just below the title. And there's also, at the top of a page, you've got a left button, right button, and then you've got tally marks, and you've got like a 7 tallied, and if you click on that, that will take you to the archive as well.
Yeah, exactly. Another thing worth mentioning about Derelict is that you really don't have a fan comment section.
True.
Unlike these others, which again is fine. As long as a comment section is unobtrusive and not annoying, I'm okay with it. But here we really don't have one. In fact, the closest thing we get to that, and I think this is just a series of update notes that Fleuter himself has inserted, because the last one is dated April 22nd of this year. He says, in order to better keep up with fan art, I have made the gallery into an easier-to-manage Tumblr. You can go there to see art others have done related to Derelict and see the links to their own works. And so these are updates that basically appear regardless of what page you're on in the comic. So you don't have comments from either the artist or the readers that go with each page, each individual page.
But I do like him having the forum option there where, if somebody wants to pose a question or to leave a comment, that's where they do it.
Exactly. I much prefer something like the forum, so I love what Fleuter's doing here, as opposed to the comment section under each individual page of the webcomic.
Yep. So, Derek, is this a webcomic that you will keep reading?
I might. I've got a lot that I'm reading right now, and it's hard for me to keep up with it. So I could. I'm going to keep this up on my tablet for a while, and it depends on how often it's updated. And that's a big thing. Okay, case in point, one of the very first webcomics that we discussed was Demon. Jason Shiga's Demon. That is updated. At first, it was updated weekdays, but over the past few months, it's been updated even over the weekend. Because that's updated on a regular basis, I keep coming back to that webcomic. However, a webcomic that's not updated consistently, I am less apt to follow. And what I'll do on my tablet, on my iPad, is just to go ahead and shut down that browser page. Because I'll keep them up for a while. But if I see that it's not updated regularly, I'll lose interest. And that tells me something. I know that you have the same phenomena. A lot of people have the same phenomena with web or podcasts, right? So, we're regular. And I think maybe that's an understatement. But there are a lot of podcasts that aren't updated on a regular basis. And if they tell you that they don't update regularly, okay, you know what to expect. But if they're supposed to be updated once a week or once a month and they're not, and there's a long stretch between episodes and you just wonder what's going on. I mean, I know life happens, but as a listener, or since we're talking about webcomics, as a reader, I'm going to lose interest.
Yeah, I agree.
So, but anyway, that's the long answer to your short question. So I'm assuming that you're going to keep coming back to this.
I'm going to keep coming back, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to order that first collection so I can, navigate the pages a little bit easier.
Yeah, I'd like to see what that looks like.
Yeah. Well, I'll let you know if I pick it up.
Okay, the third title we're going to be discussing today is The Situation, and this is a relatively short webcomic, already completed, and it's written by Jeff VanderMeer with art by Eric Orchard. And Andy, you're the one who introduced me to The Situation because of your love of VanderMeer's writing.
Yeah, Jeff VanderMeer is one of my favorite writers, and if you're not familiar with him, Jeff writes what I would call weird fiction, and his most recent work is called the Southern Reach Trilogy, which involves a secret agency called the Southern Reach that sends out expeditions to this mysterious, largely unknown place called Area X. And those people that go on those expeditions mostly die or come back completely devastated in a multitude of ways. It's a really, really good trilogy. I've read the first two books and eager to read the third one. VanderMeer and his wife Anne have also edited several excellent fiction anthologies, such as The Weird, a compendium of strange and dark stories, The Time Traveler's Almanac, and a couple of steampunk anthologies, and so much more. VanderMeer also writes books for writers. He's written one called Book Life, Strategies and Survival Tips for the 21st Century, and Wonder Book, the illustrated guide to creating imaginative fiction. And I believe this is VanderMeer's only venture into graphic novels, comics, webcomics, although he is going to do more, which I can tell you about a little bit later.
Okay. And this is one of those that I think it's the most containable of the three titles that we're discussing today, but it's the strangest. Now, granted, Derelict has a lot of weird characters and settings, or at least context, that if we could understand it is a little unusual. Okay,
Yeah.
But the situation, wow, this is its own world.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's a fairly straightforward story, because the narrator of the situation is a young boy by the name of Wick, who every now and again is called Wiki. But it's Wick, and he begins by remembering a relationship he had with a friend by the name of Mord. And Mord eventually took a job in the company that they work for in their HR department, human resources. And when Mord takes that job, then Wick's relationship with his friend Mord changes quite dramatically. In the midst of the story, Wick and some of the others who work at this company, whatever it is, they're tasked by the manager, who Wick calls Damager at times, to create a fish. Okay, and it's just as weird as it sounds. They have to create a fish. There's some other characters involved. For instance, Lear, who was a friend of Wick and Mord's, but now Mord has progressed on to human resources. So Lear is basically a worker, or at least a peer of Wick's. But then another character comes into play, someone called Scarskirt. And as the name phonetically suggests, there is something a little harsh about Scarskirt. And what happens in the situation is that Wick becomes frustrated at the way that the building of the fish is orchestrated and organized. He also becomes even more and more profoundly frustrated with the way that this business and then the larger society is run. And so it's the difference between his expectation of the way things should be and the way that they actually are, and that contextualized against these memories that Wick has. In fact, we get a couple of flashbacks of the way things used to be before, well, whatever it is that he's in right now. And it's how there's a breakdown in relationships, there's a breakdown in understanding, there's definitely a breakdown in the creation of this damn fish that causes this story to move forward. So, I said it's relatively straightforward. It may not sound that way, but it is a fairly simple story, although the way that VanderMeer and then Orchard illustrates this world, it's quite elaborate.
It really is quite elaborate, and with VanderMeer, I can tell you from reading a lot of his fiction, that's one of his strengths, is world building. He's very, very good at creating such unusual worlds that have enough of the familiar for us to be able to navigate them, but they're so odd. And they really do feel otherworldly. And what we have here with the situation is basically a story of office politics. And
okay, in fact, you saying the phrase office politics sums up what I took a little too long to describe earlier, so thank you.
No, and it's I mean, that's basically what we have here. But it's in a world that we recognize. I mean, we recognize those things that happen in offices, the political maneuvering. We recognize that, but visually it's a very different world from our own or any office that any of us would really ever work in. A part of that is of course VanderMeer's world building, but a large part of that too is the artwork, just wonderful artwork by Eric Orchard. It's just and I was trying to come up with a way to describe his work, and I don't know if this is very accurate, but I'm calling it a kinder, gentler Dave McKean.
Okay, that does make sense to me. You're talking about Orchard's work?
Yeah.
Yes, that makes sense. And I was not familiar with VanderMeer's writing before the situation, and then when you were telling me later on that you've read quite a bit of his fiction and that he's primarily a prose writer, that started to make sense to me, because in this comic, which is only about 63 pages long, okay, so not that long at all. It is a short webcomic. It's not until we get to page 6 that it really seems like a comic to me, because the first 5 pages could be, I don't want to say a picture book, but let's say an illustrated story. Because you have, I guess for the most part on those first 5 pages, 1 page of this really nice illustration, a context that Orchard creates, and then narration from Wick as he's recalling these events. And so basically we get a series of 5 pages, each of which is a page wide illustration setting, and without the words, it could be a painting, or a cartoon page. But then we get the words or the narration that goes on. And so that's where the prose comes in. So the first 5 pages, well, not only the first 5 pages, but I think most of this comic is very prose heavy. And it's not until page 6 that we get sequential storytelling, where you have, let me see, on page 6, 4 panels. We have 3 rows, and the first one is just one longer horizontal panel, and then the second row is 2 squarish panels, and then the bottom one is one long horizontal panel again. And that is the first instance of this comic that seems comic-like.
Yeah. And too, we should point out that the lettering on this webcomic is done by Zach Gialongo, I believe is the name, and very, very nice work there. And two, Derek, Tor.com, I mean, they normally have a lot of prose stories on their website, so you'll see several different short stories of varying lengths.
Right.
So this is probably something of a departure for them. So it being a little text heavy, it does not really, it's probably not going to be anything surprising to most of the readers of this site.
Yeah, no, and I don't want to suggest that there's anything negative about this being very text heavy and more of a prosy comic. I don't think that's a problem at all. It's just a different kind of comic that we have been reading, at least with the other two, for this webcomics episode. It struck me as somewhat similar to Fun Home. I don't think this as much as I used to, but the very first time I read Bechdell's Fun Home, I thought, man, that's a text-heavy comic, to the point that the narration, the text, the words, seem to take prominence over the visuals. I don't feel that the same way as I did the first time I read Fun Home, but I did have that experience about it being a very prosy novel, or a graphic novel. This had a similar feel for, but it's a very different kind. I don't want to suggest that there are any similarities other than that between The Situation and Fun Home. Mm-hmm. But I love you talking about this strange sci-fi fantastic world that VanderMeer has created. I mean, it's just great. For instance, I'm looking on page 12, and Wick is explaining that there is a recording device in the room where he and his coworkers are building a fish, and the recording device, it's a big ear that looks like it's on a rock, almost like a piece of sculpture. The manager or damager is, if I remember correctly, I don't have it pulled up right now, but she has almost like a cage torso, and there's a leaf that flutters inside. And when she gets angry, she catches fire. So it's really outrageous. There is a slug that is placed on Wick's back by the manager in order to, I guess, what did he say? To keep the bad thoughts.
Keep the bad memories, yeah.
The bad memories from getting to him. And also, and this took me 2 or 3 takes to understand, but there is a shift in the way that Mord is represented. Mm-hmm. That when he is a coworker of Wick's, he appears as a human, or I guess a human, like Wick is, but then we see a bear with Wick, and the bear is associated at times with Mord, and it took me a while to realize that this is Mord. It's just once he becomes, someone who works in HR, he takes on the appearance of a bear, which, you're talking about office politics. Depending on your view of human resources, that may or may not be appropriate.
Yeah. And how many times have we experienced that, whether it's in an office or a different type of work environment, where, we're working with someone and we're pretty much equals on the job, and then that person gets a promotion or goes to HR, and they may look the same, but they're completely different, and there's no getting that relationship back.
Exactly.
And I think that's one of the great things about this, that it's absurdist in a way, but in a way it's exactly on target.
Yeah, and it's almost as if Orchard is literalizing the way we see people metaphorically. So, for instance, getting back to the manager, I mentioned that she has almost kind of a cage-like, or at least an empty chest with a feather fluttering about. Well, there's something rather metaphorical about the way that workers usually see their managers, right? That they're, if not hard-hearted, maybe there's not much heart inside. And so there's something kind of empty. And Wick's manager keeps asking him, do you love me? Do you love me? So this is someone who wants to be liked, but of course is not liked, because Wick keeps saying, no, I don't, or at least at first. And, as you mentioned, that Mord, once he becomes part of human resources, takes on a completely different appearance that, again, is a literalization of something a little more metaphorical.
There's a really great scene in where Wick is talking to Lear, and they've had this previous relationship and they've been friendly, and he's telling her that things used to be better between them, and can't they be better again? And they're having this conversation, and Mord is in the first panel very far away, and with each panel he gets a little bit closer and a little bit closer and a little bit closer, and it's exactly what office politics is like. Even when you do have a moment when you feel like it's just me and this other person, I can be honest, I can let my guard down, you can't, because the guy from HR is just right around the corner and he's listening to everything you say. Yeah,
it's very menacing, and in fact it's that first instance, that first page of the scene that you're referring to, which I believe is 41, where we see Mord in the background almost as a silhouette, but he's a dark bear, so there's a reason why he appears dark in the background. But his head is peering over the hilltop, and you can see his eyes. But there's something really creepy and menacing about that.
Oh, yeah. I like, too, about one of the things I like about Wick, the way he is written and the way he is depicted, he appears to be a child. He's very childlike. And, a lot of times when we get our first jobs, no matter where they are, maybe it's in an office, maybe it's a different environment, we are very childlike, and we trust people, because that's... you're supposed to trust the people that you work with, and maybe you develop friendships. But, VanderMeer and Orchard show us that this can be a very, very dangerous environment to trust people, and some very bad things can happen. So it's somewhat of a cautionary tale. We can look at it a lot of different ways, but there's so many things that VanderMeer and Orchard bring to the tale that it's got a lot of depth to it.
Yeah, exactly. Let's say a little bit about the website. You've already mentioned that this is on the publisher's Tor's website, so Tor.com, and you can find not only the situation, but as you've mentioned, a variety of other narratives, primarily prose there. But under the situation, if you go to just the situation and you don't consider anything else of the Tor website, you do see that there is a place for comments, and with all 63 of these pages, there seems to be a total of only 14 comments that people have made. Mm-hmm. Because you can make a comment about the story as a whole, and that will carry over. So it's not comments per page, it's
right.
Comments per narrative. So in this case,
right.
It's 14 for the entire story. So they seem like they begin in January of 2012, and the last comment is made in March of 2012. So this didn't last for that long, but I tell you, there is a lot packed into this short story, and VanderMeer does a great job of fleshing out this what I would consider a short story world. This would be, and I guess it's worth mentioning, and I have not read this. I don't know if you have, but the story, the situation, it actually originated as a short story, prose, in the collection The Third Bear, and I think at one point you could find the situation online, and he even gives a link to it. But if you go to that link, it's no longer there.
Oh, that's too bad.
So the story. So I'm wondering how that story reads. Have you read it?
No, I have not. I actually have it in. I actually think I may have the Third Bear collection. I've read some of his collections, but that one's one I have not finished. So I have not read that story. So it would be interesting to compare the two.
I know, because to me, one of the things that gives this story so much life and uniqueness is Orchard's art. Mm-hmm. So without the art, what would the story be like? And I'm sure it'd be great. It's just it would be very different.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, I can tell you from reading VanderMeer's other work that he is able to paint those worlds, with text. Obviously not in the same way that Orchard would with illustration, but his world building is really incredible. You really feel that you are there, and again, he's able to combine the familiar with the totally unfamiliar in a way that makes you in a way comfortable, but in a way uncomfortable because of the strange things that are going on. He's really gifted at that.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I'm looking at the very last page of this webcomic, and I don't want to give anything away, but it does have it has an impactful ending, I think. And so you could tell that VanderMeer is a short story writer and a novelist. In other words, he is an accomplished prose fiction writer. Mm-hmm. Because I think that the way that this story ends, it's great. But just the visuals on this last page, without giving anything away, you see the kind of strange world that he, along with Eric Orchard, have created. So Wick, he talks about being in the city now, and there's some strange things that he encounters and strange people. There's one person that looks like his head has broken open, and it looks like black smoke is pouring from his head. Mm-hmm. But even more interesting to me is this character standing behind Wick, that if you're a Doctor Who fan, you're going to look at this and you'll immediately think Ood.
Oh,
are you a Whovian?
Not a serious one, no.
But I don't know if you're familiar with the character Oods.
No.
The Ood population, and they are creatures that have heads that have tentacles coming out around where the mouth is or should be, something octopus or squid-like, or maybe even cuttlefish-like, and it just looks a lot like the Ood. And so I'm wondering if Orchard had that in mind in creating that strange creature. But this is just the tip of the iceberg of the strange visual world that you'll find in the situation.
And if listeners go to Tor.com and read this webcomic, which I hope they will, you should know that VanderMeer has more graphic novel / comic things coming out. I actually contacted him today and told him that we were going to be discussing the situation today, and I said, do you have anything else coming out that's graphic novel or comics related? And he said, in fact, I do. He said he's got the next book in his series, the Ambergris cycle, is going to be a graphic novel. And right now, that his Ambergris cycle is a collection of 3 books. The first one is called City of Saints and Madmen, and that's a collection of interrelated short stories. The second book is called Shriek, and Afterward, and the last book in that series right now is called Finch. And all of those take place in this city of Ambergris. But the next book is going to be a graphic novel. He said it's just in the planning stages right now. He didn't mention anything about an artist or a publisher. But if you do like the situation, you're going to have more graphic fiction from VanderMeer coming up.
Wow, so 3 really good titles that we discussed on this episode of the Webcomic Show. We started with The Fox Sister by Christina Strain and Jade Aït-Kaci. And again, if I'm mispronouncing that name, please forgive me. Then we moved on to Ben Fleuter's Derelict, with all of its questions that it raises, and then ended with Jeff VanderMeer and Eric Orchard's The Situation. So, in fact, we didn't give the web address of The Situation, but if you just go to www.tor.com and then do a search for VanderMeer and or The Situation, you'll find it. So, 3 really good webcomics to check out, and, things like this are the reason why we started the Webcomic Show.
Yeah, I mean, and we've spoken before, Derek, about this is kind of a labor of love for us and a discovery, too, because I think it's safe to say neither of us had really delved into webcomics as much as we would have liked before we started this. So, every month is kind of a revelation for us about this. So that's one of the best parts about it, and I'm glad that we were able to discuss these 3 webcomics today.
That's right. And, one of the things that allows us to continue bringing you great comics talk, webcomics and otherwise, is our sponsor, and that is Discount Comic Book Service. So go to their website, dcbservice.com. They have great deals. It's an incredible way, the no-brainer way to pre-order your comics. But they also have a digital comic shop, and you can find that at mydigitalcomics.com. And Andy told you at the top of the show the various deals that they have. So whether it is mydigitalcomics.com or dcbservice.com, you cannot go wrong. Those guys have great deals every single month. And after you do get your comics through those means, get in touch with us and let us know what you'll be reading. If you go to our website and in the right-hand side of your browser, you click on the Send a Voicemail tab, you can send us a message from your computer or your mobile device. It's very simple through the wonders of SpeakPipe. Or you can do it the old-fashioned way. Our phone number is 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
And you can also check us out on Twitter, and that's where we post news to our blog and announcements. And you can find us there at the number 2 guys with PhDs.
That's right. You can also email us. We're 2guys@comicsalternative.com. You can contact me directly. I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com. And Andy, how can they get in touch with you?
You can reach me at wolverton@comicsalternative.com.
You can also find us on Facebook, on Tumblr, and on Instagram. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn, and you can find every single one of our episodes, webcomics related and otherwise, as well as our list of reviews and comics related commentary that we put up on the blog at the website, which is comicsalternative.com.
That's right, and we would love to hear from you about what you think about these webcomics. And we've gotten, Derek, a lot of great feedback from other people that have suggested other webcomics to us. Some of those we've looked at, and some of them we have not had the time to look at yet, but keep those recommendations coming.
Yeah, we really do appreciate that. As Andy said, some of the choices we've made are because of you guys suggesting what we should read on the Webcomic Show. So keep the correspondences alive.
Yes.
Yeah. So let us hear from you. And until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy.
We'll see you later next month on another Webcomic Show.